This is Mai Kue, and you are listening to The Narrow Path in the Floating Mountains. This is a podcast that is dedicated to stories and tellings of my spiritual experiences. Some of the stories I will be sharing will cover many topics such as the parallels in spirituality and mental health, ghost stories, dreams, tarot reading, mediumship, and more. I do want to provide a disclaimer that these are all just based on my personal experiences. I do not have any certification in spiritual healing or mental health therapy, nor do I have an altar to practice Hmong shamanistic healing or rituals. Many of the stories I will be sharing are based purely on my personal experiences and how I have made sense of them throughout the years. So to those who are listening to this podcast, I hope that you will enjoy my stories and join me on the narrow path in the floating mountains.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry, girl, you just don't make me feel right. I never meant to make you cry, you were right. Just leave me be, I'm not gonna put up a fight.
For today's episode, I will be talking about my spiritual paranormal experiences as an adolescent. It's going to be a pretty long video because there's just so much that happened within this part of my life that it can be attributed to some of the traumas that I experienced around this time. And then also just along with trying to discover who I was, that a lot of that layered on top of each other just culminated into all these experiences that I was having. So grab a seat and get comfortable because there's a lot of spooky stories that are in this episode. So I want to start by kind of giving you a background about what I was dealing with as a teenager. So when I talk about being a teenager, I'm going to kind of push it back to my preteen years. It was really around my 7th or 8th grade year that I started experiencing a lot of trauma. So my trauma specifically is sexual abuse from someone that I knew, and that continued on into my high school years. And so from this moment, I guess in a way, in reflecting about my spiritual and paranormal experiences, I was going through a lot mentally and emotionally too. I know that for some people, they believe that your spiritual and paranormal experiences can be attributed to emotional and mental instability. And for me, I'm one to think about it that way too, right? Like, what are the emotional and mental factors that contribute to your spiritual paranormal experiences too? And while I don't believe that all spiritual and paranormal experiences are hallucinations and a result of my emotional or mental instability at the time, that they can be intertwined, right? Because there's the belief that when you are very depressed and you're very low, you're kind of functioning at lower vibrations. And so that can cause more like negative energy or entities to swarm around you. And sometimes like you're shrouded in this darkness that you really can't see your light out of it. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my background to, and also as it relates to my spiritual experiences, because they are very intertwined. And I'm able to reflect on that now as an adult and see why all of this stuff was happening at the time when I was also experiencing a lot of trauma. That really is this moment in my life was like the crux of my spiritual and paranormal experiences. And so as a teenager, stepping back to my 8th grade years, I was experiencing a lot of trauma, and I just didn't quite understand what was going on. And so I just kind of navigated my life, just living one day at a time, just trying to make it through. It also impacted my how I was at school, my productivity at school. I started skipping school a lot. I started smoking, and I just really had this like, I don't care what's going to happen to me, or I just want to go, right? So there was always this fight or flight mode of not wanting to be in one place and just wanting to find a sense of safeness elsewhere than where I was. And so again, a huge part of this part of my life was my response to the trauma that I was dealing with. And again, that was where a lot of these like paranormal things started happening to me. Like I was very depressed. I was trying to figure out how to alleviate depression, but also like not quite understanding that I was depressed. My perception of depression as a teenager was that you were just like sad all the time, you couldn't move, or you were just like severely like emotionally and mentally unstable. And so I didn't think I was depressed. I didn't think that I was emotionally affected by my trauma. I just kind of thought I'm a angsty teen and this is what I like. I like things that talk about that are very angsty. I think at the time too, alternative rock was starting to become very pop. And so you had like bands like what's a band like My Chemical Romance and all of that coming up. And so I started really being curious about this alternative like music, but also the culture revolving around like this dark look, right? And so I kind of was thinking, oh, maybe my thing is that I am into like dark things. And so there were a few girls at my school who were pagans or Wiccans, and they were very goth. And so I found fascination in that too. But I just never really like invested myself into that lifestyle. But I knew that there was like this alternative lifestyle elsewhere. At the same time too, I was like questioning my sexuality and my sexuality mostly. And so it was an obviously, being a teenager, you're wanting to figure out like who you were, your identity, and trying to establish that. At the same time too, like all of this other stuff that's piled on top of being a teenager. And so on top of everything, again, I was always trying to find an escape, right? An escape elsewhere. But skipping school and doing things oftentimes led me to very dangerous situations. And even aside from school, dangerous situations that happen outside of school. These situations, for a few of them, were near-death experiences. And then on top of that, just being curious about so many other things in the world that I started dabbling in just different types of divination, and also Wiccan and pagan spirituality. So the two girls that I went to school with, they were pagans, and so I was curious about that. Like, what is that? And so that's when I first came to learn about like Wiccan witchcraft and the practice. And so there's a stigma around witchcraft that it's like evil stuff, black magic, and retaliation and sending curses and hexes, but it's really not that. It's some of that, but not all of that. So there are some Wiccan practices or witchcraft practices where they don't do that, and it's more about honoring the natural world and the natural like energetic flow of spirits and beings. And so it's still honoring like spirits and entities, but in the Western cultures. And so my first experience with that was, just buying like a small book or borrowing books from the library about Wiccan practices. And most of the things that I did was how does it come back to me to heal, right? Like how to become more self-empowered, how to feel stronger, how to feel like happy, how to feel more comfortable in my skin, right? Because a lot of the books out there was about feminine empowerment, so female empowerment. And so that's kind of what I did. But I also learned about casting protection, and it was just like it was a very weird experience. So we were skipping school and we took shelter under an underpass to prevent like the security guards or whatever from catching us. And this girl, we were just talking, and all of a sudden something fell, like a piece of rock was thrown, and it was thrown right into the stream where we were hiding under. The underpass over the stream, we were hiding under that underpass, and a rock was thrown from the bridge. I guess you can say it's a bridge. And so we all just kind of like perked up, and we were like, what the heck was that? And so one of the girls who was with us, she was a self-identified like pagan. She's like talking, and she kind of under her breath casts like a protection like shield. And at that time I was like, what the heck is she doing? And I'm like, is this even real, right? And so she was doing that, and then just being in conversation with some of the girls who practice pagan and Wiccan, that I learned a little bit through that. And so I came to learn how to do that. And then, of course, with like divination, from a very young age, early on, I wouldn't say really young, but early on, I think around my middle school years, I kind of just knew how to do candle reading or candle scrying. And so this form of divination is that you just stare at the candle flame and you receive messages from it. You receive downloads of like messages, spiritual messages, to help you relay it, to either help you in your situation or to relay it to the person who is seeking like your service. So I figured out how to do that at a really young age. I didn't know that I was doing that, but I just knew how to do that. And then as a young kid too, I saw it in a like TV show or an anime where they used a pendulum, and I didn't know that it was a pendulum that they were using, but they would use it to find something missing. And I just thought as a kid, like, oh my god, like this is so cool, I want to learn how to do it. And I like learned how to do it. I figured out how to do it when we found, like, me and my younger brother, like we used the pendulum to look for something that was missing, and we ended up finding it. But then our other siblings were like, what the heck are you doing? Like, that's not real. You guys just so happened to find it is because like it was easy to find anyways. And so just learning how to use a pendulum without even understanding it fully. And then also just there was like this other, I kind of have a feeling that a lot of Japanese animes or mangas, they touch on very spiritual topics, but they touch on it by way of like the magical girl theme. And so even when we're thinking about like Sailor Moon, they're using crystals to do healing. And there was another anime that I was really drawn to, which was Card Captors, and she was trying to capture the spirit of the cards because they had escaped, and so she would put it back into the book that they belonged to, and eventually she set her own intentions onto the cards, and the cards became hers, and she became the protector of the cards, or the guardian of the cards. Well, not guardian, but she was the basically like the master of these cards. And so as an adult now, I realize that they were tarot cards. So just like that familiarity with these like items, these divination items, spiritual divination things, I realized like how intertwined it was in my childhood without me even knowing what they were, and then just knowing how to use them, right? So that was kind of like my experience as an adolescent with like divination. And then another thing too, as like a teenager, I was I did some really questionable things dealing with spirituality and paranormal activity type of things. But I had a friend in high school too. And this was the friend that I would always skip school with. And for some reason, like, we went and hid in the woods so that security guards wouldn't catch us. And we were there, and she had the idea of doing a Ouija board, like a DIY Ouija board. Thank goodness we didn't know what the frick we were doing, because nothing spooky came out of it. Nothing spooky. I don't think anything spooky came out of it, but she like showed me how to like drop the Ouija board on a piece of paper with pen, and then we used a quarter as the planchette. And as we were doing it, we were like sitting in the middle of like this patch of woods outside of our school, and it was like snowing all around. And as we were doing it, we were like asking questions. Like, I think she asked if her boyfriend was looking for her, or if anyone was looking for us. And and the planchette goes to like the letter P, and her boyfriend's name started with the letter P. And so as soon as it was like writing it out, but then it wasn't writing out his full name, it was just kind of like P something something something, that a huge chunk of snow just fell. And so we ended up saying goodbye. Like, we made sure that it was saying goodbye, and then we went. And as we approached the school, her boyfriend came out of the school, and she was like, "Oh, were you looking for us?" And he was kind of like, "Yeah," but stupid stuff, right? If anything went awry, that it could have been even worse. And then I remembered, like, being a stupid teenager, like asking my cousins if we wanted to do this, and we did it, but then it was like somebody was manipulating the planchette, so it never really worked out. But thank freaking goodness. Oh my gosh. But other experiences that I had, and please, like, don't come for me, this was like choices I made as like a teenager who was just trying to find an escape, trying to find some connection to something else. And it was just like, you know, experimenting with things. I think at the time too, I was very wary of something. So a lot of the times, I kind of do feel that at that time too, there was something that was protecting me from greater harm. And every time it was like a dangerous situation, somehow like my conscience would just be like, no. Or I would just have this gut feeling of like, don't do it, or back away. And so I kind of feel like I was divinely protected by, you know, I kind of feel like it was something from my father's like maternal side that was protecting me. And so aside from that too, though, I did have a couple of experiences where it was really a stupid decision on my behalf as like a teenager, but also I nearly died. And one of those experiences was that I nearly drowned, and it was me along with two other I guess they're like nieces to me, but we're pretty close in age. Was that there was this family gathering, and they lived just half a block or about a block from a boat launch ramp. And there was this huge lake by this town. So they lived in a little, like, it's not a little town, it's actually pretty big, but it's not as big as Milwaukee. And this lake was like really known for being a big like lake, for being inland. And there were stories about, you know, things just happening at the lake, or Hmong people had this superstition that there was this dragon that lived in this lake, and for us to be careful. And so us being like just preteens and teenagers, we decided like, oh, let's go over there because it's a hot day. Let's go over there and just kind of like step around in the water. And we were there. We kept going back and forth, just kind of like hanging out. And something happened where one of my nieces, so again, this niece, she's like closer in age to me, she slips, and we're thinking like, is she for real? Because I've never seen someone drowning before, but she was like gasping for air. And thank goodness she wasn't too far off the ramp or where the ramp was, but she was gasping for air. And someone was like, what's going on with her? And I go, like, I think she's drowning. And so I go over there thinking like, I have to do something. And so I go over there, and I didn't know what I was thinking. I just went over there and I thought that I could just pull her in, but I ended up slipping, and I blacked out for a few seconds before I came to and saw that I was realized that I was underneath the water, and I could see the sun, and I could see the people standing on there was like this dock, standing on the dock. And there were these two uncles that were on the other side loading their boats, that when they saw this, they came over, they threw their rope over. And I remember just seeing that and reaching for it, and then going, getting pulled onto shore. And as I came to shore, I realized that both of my other nieces were still in there. And so the uncle jumped in and grabbed the both of them and came out, and we got such an earful that it was like the biggest regret I had as a teenager until that point. And what happened was that when we came out of the water, the parents, obviously they all found out. They came and they called our spirits back, and we each brought home a rock. So, is this a paranormal experience? Not quite. But this experience also led to other things that started happening to me later on in life that in a way affected just my relationship with the spiritual world or spirituality. And so as our spirits were being called back, we had an aunt that was saying that, we slipped on dragon poop and that the dragons are trying to take us. And the crazy thing about this story is that the three of us, we are the youngest daughters of our families. And when we had fell under, the water was calm. It was super calm. Even the other girls that were there with us that saw this happening, they could even attest to it, that it was really calm. And so when we went back to get our spirits called, there was just like waves and waves of water crashing against the boat ramp. And all of the elders, all of the uncles and aunties and our parents were like, "Are you guys crazy? Like, we wouldn't even step in this water. Like, why would you do that?" And, like, look at how angry the lake is, and, everything that you could possibly hear from a parent. That's what we heard. And the girls who came back with us to get our spirits called, they were saying that, the water wasn't that high, or the water wasn't crashing like that when we went. And so that was like an experience that I had. And later on, it transpired into just like me having like a very complicated relationship. I'm just gonna start calling things that are really hard to explain complicated relationship with like the spiritual world. And only until a few years ago did I learn about like dragon spirits. and how they can take you if they wanted to, and if like you owe them a debt, then they're gonna come after you. They're gonna keep coming. And so I think it's just so crazy how at this time, at this point in my life, that everything just kind of started escalating too. And the crazy thing was that as the spiritual and paranormal things were escalating, my trauma and my abuse was also escalating. And so things were just happening at a more intense rate than what I, like, even things that I didn't have control over, right? That they were just escalating. And then my interactions and my encounters were just, there was just more of it happening. For example, like I remember one night, this was all around the same time that, I think it was either before or after my drowning experience, but I remember being in my room, and it was around like 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and my siblings, they all worked, so we were all still in high school. They all worked, and my mom, she would do grocery shopping to come home and cook dinner later in the evening. And so because I had like art homework, I think I had art homework because I remember doing a watercolor painting, but I can't remember if it was just for leisure or for homework. But I was doing this, and I'm sitting on my bed. I have my little Hello Kitty lamp on, and I was already sitting there for close to like an hour or 2 hours. It was just me in my room, and then in the room next to me was my younger brother. And then in the living room was my nephew, who was like 6 or 7. So by this time I was already like in high school. That, you know, we were there and just kind of doing our own thing. It was quiet. The house was very quiet. They were playing game or they were watching TV. And as I was painting, something falls from my closet. So how our closet is I share it with my sister because we both slept in the same room. But my mom also stuffed our 𝙏𝙗𝙚 in our closet. And this included like bulky hats and the sashes and everything. And so the hats, my mom would have it in plastic bags to protect them from dust and mold. And so she had them, but she had it stacked really nicely on the top shelves in our closet. And so as I'm painting, something falls from the closet, and I go and I'm like, okay, it's the hat. It's one of the Hmong hats. And maybe my mom was like searching through our closet to like check out like if there's anything she needs to repair or whatever. And so that's kind of what I was thinking, right? And so I go and I pick it up and I put it back on the shelf. And from the closet, and I swear it came from the closet, was this like muffled like crying sound. And it wasn't just like any kind of crying. It was a very specific cry. And for Hmong people, like, we know this sound when we hear it. It was a sound of somebody like nya, and it was coming from my closet. I didn't even know like what this type of crying was. I just knew it was crying because that's what I called it. And I stand there and I'm like, wait, what the frick? Is this like really happening? And I'm like, is this really happening to me right now? And so I put it in the closet. And mind you, at this point, I was still like pretty scaredy cat person. I put it in the closet. I come out. I walk out. And I see my brother sitting in the room playing game. And I'm like, hey, is that crying coming from your game or from your TV? And he just kind of looks at me like, no, like, what are you talking about? And so I'm like, huh. I was like, I heard crying, right? I don't tell them that where it's coming from. I just told them I heard crying. So then I go into the living room and I'm like, okay, anyone else there? And my nephew's in the living room and I ask him like, hey, was that crying coming from the TV? And he goes, no. He just kind of gives me a weird look. I was like, I heard someone crying, and are you sure it wasn't you? Like, you weren't pretending crying or anything like that? And he's like, no, like, what are you talking about? He's just kind of looking at me weird. So I look at the room because our room was at the end of the hallway and you can see it from the living room. So I look in there and I'm like, obviously I don't see anything. Then I'm like, what the heck just happened? Or maybe it was just like sound on the outside that I heard. And so right then too, probably like 5 or 10 minutes later, I hear the doors of the cars closing and my mom and my siblings, they come in. And I'm like telling them, I'm like, you guys, I heard crying from our closet. And they're like, you're just like thinking too much, the usual like, oh, you're just thinking too much. That was nothing. You're just scaring yourself. And so I'm like, not sure what to believe because I'm like, okay, maybe it was me, right? At this point, I'm like, okay, maybe it was me. Like, who cares? So I go back to the bedroom and I'm just kind of like drawing and thinking and trying to make sense of everything. Thinking that, oh, maybe my mom was looking through stuff. Or maybe, just still trying to like make sense of it. But after that too, my mom has denied like going into the closet or even me sharing that with her. But that was like really my first profound experience with the paranormal, mostly just hearing. I think at this point too, I also experienced my first sleep paralysis, where I could hear like sounds around me, but I was like awake, and just like remembering how afraid I was to not have control over my body, but also thinking like, okay, move your fingers, like this is happening right now, move your fingers, do this and this and this. And the thing was like, I was sleeping on my side and I felt like there was this huge body on top of me. I didn't hear anything else, but that's kind of what I felt. But that was also my first experience at this house too. Like our house, the one that I grew up in, was not haunted. I think it was just one of those things where they just, if you're prone to it, then it's gonna happen to you. And so I also slept by the closet. After this experience, I moved my bed to the closet like years and years later. Like maybe a couple of years later, I moved it to be by the closet, and that was when I had the experience of having sleep paralysis. Because I think an interesting thing to note was that we grew up not really having like strong belief in the paranormal. We went to church early on in my life, from when I could remember all the way until like my younger brother was born, and he was only not quite old enough to go to school yet, but when we moved, we stopped going to the church that we were going to too. And so we didn't go to church, and we didn't have Hmong altar, or we didn't, my dad didn't 𝙒𝒂𝒂𝒔𝒕 until like we moved into our third house, where I had like the experience with the crying coming from the closet. And so for us, spirituality and understanding how that all works wasn't really a part of our family's like routine. We really didn't talk about ghostly things either. We didn't really talk about dreams. We didn't have a way to. We really didn't have conversations around that. And so the only thing that we had a connection to with that was like through scary movies. So that's how we learned about spirituality and paranormal things, was through movies. But that's kind of where I think that's also why my ideas of spirituality are so fluid, that there's no set way for me, like how I think about how spirituality works and how to navigate it is very fluid, is because of my personal experiences with it. And so that being my first experience, another experience was it's so interesting too, because it was really during my adolescent years that I started to have more experiences and encounters. I started questioning what else is there, right? I started questioning ideas of like life and death, also because of my depression, and just questioning like what else is there, like what's my purpose if this is how my life is going now, like what else is my purpose? And so in a very interesting way, questioning like my existence, I can kind of say like I was having an existential crisis, right? Like, who am I? Like, what am I? Like, what are we? How much more can we? How do we progress? What's like the next step, right? All aspects of that. And so I really took to what eventually helped me out of that was my involvement with like after school art programs that really took me out of this funk. It really helped me start getting understanding of some enjoyment in life. And so that's kind of how I was, eventually how I got out of it. If there's a light at the end of the tunnel in that part of my life, that it in a almost cliche way, that art really brought me out of it. But other experiences that I had too, that are just kind of for entertainment, because we talk about it, me and my siblings and some close family members, we talk about this experience, like not a lot, but when we do talk about like paranormal experiences, we talk about this. Was that we were visiting relatives in Detroit, because at that time there was a Hmong Labor Day event, or was it? I think it was Labor Day. It was either Labor Day or Memorial. I think it was Memorial, because it was rainy, so it was still early spring. But we were there for Memorial weekend, and we were only going to stay there for 2 days. And oh no, or was it July 4th? Because I remember spending time traveling there, like driving there and then driving back. So that would have been 4 days. And then the 2 days was when we went to the tournament. So it might have been a July 4th weekend week. And so we went to Detroit. We went to sleep over with this family that used to live in Milwaukee. And Detroit at this point was this was like back in early 2000s. I guess like it doesn't matter, but it was right around the time when I think Eminem came out with 8 Mile. But I was gonna say 7 Mile, because 7 Mile is like a little fair or a little market that we have in the Milwaukee area. But anyways, it was right around that time, and we were there visiting this family member, but mostly because my brother was talking to his girlfriend, who's his now wife. So at the time they were just dating. So my mom and another aunt, we decided to go. My mom met my sister-in-law's mom, and just, it was like my brother was out of school, and I think he was just kind of set on trying to establish a relationship and eventually marrying my sister-in-law. And so we went to visit, and we slept over at a cousin's house. And the first night we were there, they were joking with us. I don't think they were joking. They were telling us that, you know, we got there really late and we were outside talking. And they were telling us that there's a switch at the top of the party store that they live next to. It was like a party store that sold liquor and all that. And they had like security lights or whatever. But he said that there's a switch at the top of the roof of the party liquor place where if they throw a glass bottle at the top, the light like shuts off or turns on, right? The light turns on or shuts off or something. It was like some weird thing like that. And so he does that, and then all of a sudden like the light turns on. We're like, oh, he's just kidding, because it's security, right? It's like security detection, or it's motion detected. And so then I think he throws it and it turns on, but then something happens too, and I think he throws the glass bottle and then it turns off too. I remember him demonstrating it twice, and it both turning on and off at the same time. So we were just like, oh my god, he's just joking. He just knows how like this whole motion detector thing is. And then we come inside because it was ready to eat dinner. So we come inside, we eat dinner, and then we go to sleep. And we were like, we're gonna wake up the next morning, get ready, and go to the fairgrounds. So we wake up the next morning, and we're awoken by a baby crying, and the sound of this baby was like a newborn. It was like a newborn cry. And we didn't really know this family, and when we arrived, we thought that there were still family members that were sleeping. And so we were awoken by this baby crying. We're like, okay, somebody's baby's crying, like go give them a bottle, or maybe our aunt's gonna give them a bottle or something. So then we just go back to sleep, right? We go back to sleep, and then the next morning, a few minutes later, we wake up, and we're awoken by like the sound of pots and pans, like as if like our aunt was getting food ready for us to eat and go. Because for Hmong families, like if we have guests over and there's a huge event happening the next day, it's just courtesy to wake up early and prepare like breakfast for your guests so that you can go and do activities and things for the rest of the day, right? And so we thought it was our aunt just preparing breakfast or whatever, and we all get up, we're getting ready, and we're waiting in the living room, and we're just kind of like waiting for everyone to get up so that we all go to the fairgrounds together. So our aunt too, they had a stand at the fairgrounds, and I think they did like papaya. They did papaya salad. And so we're waiting for them, and we're just kind of waiting for them so that they can show us how to get there, because we were gonna tailgate there. And so we're waiting, and we realized that when my aunt came out, she was still in her sleeping wear, and she had just woken up. And so we're like, wait a minute, this is so weird, right? So we're thinking like, oh, our cousins are just trying to scare us. At the back of our minds, we're like, our cousin's just trying to scare us. Nobody mentioned it, by the way. Nobody mentioned this to anyone. We just kind of thought it was like weird. So we kind of pieced it all together, like, okay, where's the baby? You know, like, where's the baby? Somebody probably has a baby. Because then when we left, like, not all the family members were up either. We just thought that there was still people who were asleep in the rooms. And so we're thinking like, okay, maybe she has like a daughter who has a baby, or like a son who has a baby, right? And so then we go to the fairgrounds, and we come back that night, and we have dinner, and we go to sleep, and then we wake up, everything's normal. But then my brother, he had So this is like the second night, and this is the night that we were leaving. My brother woke up the next morning, and the night before he bought like a CD, and he was listening to it before he went to sleep. So he still had his headphones on, and it was when portable CD players were a thing. This was like before MP3 players. And so he had the CD player like Walkman, playing, and he had it under his pillow. And where he slept by the closet, by the door in the bedroom that we were all sleeping in. And we were there, and we were getting up, we were picking up our pillows and blankets, putting in a nice pile, and getting ready to go. And my brother, he's like a late sleeper, so he was like the last one to get up. And when he was like packing his stuff up, he's like, hey, you guys, like, where's my CD? Like, where's my CD player? And we're like, I don't know, like, you're sleeping there, nobody did anything, you know? And so he's like looking all over the place, and he's looking all over the place, and he can't find his CD player, but his headphones were still attached to his head. And so we're looking all over the place, and he eventually finds his CD player, but the disc is missing. And we're like flipping over the whole bedroom. We're even like asking each other, like, okay, like, did you accidentally pack it into your bag? We're looking, and we can't, right? We can't find it. And so we end up like leaving. But when we ended up leaving, my brother still couldn't find his CD. And he did tell them that if they find it, to let him know. But they never did, because they never got back to him. And on our drive home from Detroit to Milwaukee, we started to just talk about like my brother starts talking about the weird thing that happened on the first night. So my brother ended up staying up with this cousin, and this cousin, they were just talking, drinking, and hanging out in the living room. I think they were like they were smoking too. They were smoking weed, and they ended up staying up late. My brother goes up to go get a drink, and as he like exits the kitchen, one of the cabinets in the kitchen just slams shut. It just slams shut, and the cousin who lives there goes, oh yeah, if you're hungry, just grab yourself something to eat. My brother's like, who is he talking to? You know? And so my brother just comes back and sits down, and you know, as they're telling us the story, we're thinking like, oh, it's maybe because they're high. But then we're like, wait a minute, like the whole situation with like his CD player, and then we started talking about the baby crying and the dishes, and we were all like, what the heck? Like, we totally thought that it was somebody's baby, somebody who lived in the house's baby. And so all of these things that just happened, like, just really, like, we all are witnesses to like this. It wasn't just like an isolated situation. It was that we all like experienced this, down to even like our parents. And so again, this was also around the time when I was like a teenager. I don't think this was happening just because of me. I really think that house was haunted, and that they knew because they were interacting with it like it was normal. But that was one of the other situations where I am just like, whoa, like this is some real shit. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because I think as adolescents and teenagers, we have these experiences, and I feel like we're very prone to having these experiences during this time because we're still trying to figure out like ourselves and how to exist in this world. And a lot of it, I feel like a lot of it, we're very sensitive to the paranormal and the spiritual too, and that we're very prone to experimenting too, because we're just wanting to figure out like how to exist in this world. I think too, we're also in this very like this stage of flux where we are trying to figure out, you know, we're not quite adults, but we're not kids either. And in this state of flux is kind of like a very lucid state, but prolonged lucid state of us being hyper aware of just everything around us. And my experience being one of them, right? Having all of these things happen to us, I kind of feel like a lot of the paranormal like things that we experience are stories from either our childhood or our adolescent years. And things that are just more profound. I think as an adult now, I feel like I'm more prepared to understand things, but not yet like have a full grasp of it, but grasp it enough to know how to proceed, or how to move forward, or how to interpret this thing that I'm experiencing. So this concludes this episode. I hope you enjoyed the stories that I shared. Tune into the next episodes where I talk about dreams. It will be split up into 2 parts. The first part talking about lucid and vivid dreams and what are they, and then the second part will be talking about some more heavier topics into different types of dreams. So please tune in, and I will talk to you later. And that concludes this episode of The Narrow Path in the Floating Mountains. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tune in for the next one coming out soon.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry.